Thank you for attending. My name is Tim Tobin. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Planatome. Our company has a little bit different genesis where it came from than most others here. I also would normally have said that it has a slightly different business model as well, but we are very similar to Lara, who just spoke up here. We are also an IP licensing business model, so I'll get into that in a minute. But so Planatome, the origins of Planatome actually comes from the semiconductor industry, which is where we make the most advanced product ever conceived of mankind, right? Where we make chips that power all sorts of different things. So it was a spin out of a company my business partner Steve and I started back in 1998. And we were developing this nano polish process for companies like Intel and Samsung and Apple and big name companies. So it spun out of that when we found an application for it outside of the semiconductor industry. So what is Planatome? Planatome it's patented. It's a technology platform that we adapted from semiconductor manufacturing, and then we go and we license it to big name companies like Johnson & Johnson, Medtronic, companies like that. And it allows them to make the world's most advanced surgical cutting instruments. So to put it into perspective, the semiconductor industry, we put 50 billion transistors into a chip the size of your fingernail right here. In order to do that, we need to do things on the nanometer scale, which means we produce lines that are 2 nanometers in length. A nanometer would be if you took a hair out of your head, you look at the little round end of it, you cut that up 80,000 times and you take 2 pieces. That's 2 nanometers. So it's pretty remarkable. So we take that level of precision and we put that nanometer level precision into surgical instrumentation. So, and it completely changes both the clinical outcomes and the economics of surgery. So current state of the art. If you look at anything that is made out of surgical grade stainless steel that cuts in the OR, they all look like this because they take a stainless steel blank and they grind it up to a point, and then that's your cutting edge. So this right here, if you look at the edge, that's a side profile. This line right here that looks like kind of a medieval torture device, that is actually the edge of the #1 scalpel blade in the world that is cutting you. So every other surgical cutting instrument made out of stainless steel, whether it's scissors, you have 2 of those, curettes, rongeurs, you name it, they are all made the same way. So what do we do with that? If you take, what's the problem with that? With 100-year-old technology, that last picture I showed you, that was patented in 1915. So, and nothing has changed since then. If you take something that looks like a saw, it cuts like a saw. You can see it rips and cuts and tears the tissue out. We take that exact same scalpel and we polish it, and this is what it looks like when we're done. So totally different. And as you can imagine, the mechanism of action, the clinical outcome, it's a very clean slice instead of a ripping and tearing out of the tissue. So it doesn't take a medical professional, which I am not, to figure out you're going to get much better healing from one than the other. But it also, these serrations that lead to the clinical issues, that's also the failure mechanism for these cutting instruments. So there's a huge financial benefit from that as well. So the surgical cutting instrument market, $15 billion market. Where can we apply our technology? It's to $8.4 billion of that. We've split it up into 4 buckets. We're engaged with companies in every single one of these, big name companies. In this, I'm going to talk specifically about the robotic and minimally invasive, just because the use case there is huge. So, but there's big applications in all those. These next couple slides I'm going to go through really fast so I can get to the robotic assisted. But from a clinical standpoint, unparalleled clinical healing. If you're not ripping tissue out, you have much lower inflammation, 50 to 60% less collagen deposition, which you can see in the pictures on the top there. Also reduces TGF-beta and macrophage density, so lower inflammation. If you have less inflammation, the wound closes much faster, 90% wound closure after 3 days as opposed to 10% with a traditional cutting instrument. And then from post-operatively, the complications that come from that, I'm just going to touch on 2 of them, but keloid and hypertrophic scarring, changing the scalpel alone, 86% reduction in keloid and hypertrophic scarring, which can be incredibly disfiguring and life-changing for those that are prone to that. Also diabetic, immunocompromised wound healing. We did a study with a diabetic population and a non-diabetic, and it level set the healing aspects in all 3 primary wound healing phases. So from an economic standpoint, what does it give you? Differentiation. Everybody's been competing on 100-year-old technology. So we will get durability as well as efficiency. They're not having to change things out in the operating room, and all the clinical benefits that I talked about before. So that allows licensees of the technology so that they can compete either with margin, getting a premium product on something they had before, or market share, going after somebody. Because if you look at the COGS, the change of, or cost of goods sold, that changes by about $1. It is minute in terms of what it actually does. So now, specific to that one case, the robotics, big name companies, it is a race of innovation. I'm sure you see headlines every day, big name companies developing the next generation robotic platforms. So they're building these Formula F1 Ferraris that they're incorporating incredible capabilities, which you can see the whole list of them here. But what's actually touching the tissue, what's touching the ground for that Formula F1, it's 100-year-old technology. So you've built this beautiful car and you've put wagon wheels on it in terms of what's actually touching the ground. Imagine how much faster it could be going if you're using current generation technology. So specific to the robotic surgery model, for those of you that are familiar with it, it's very much the razor blade model. 60%, and I'm not picking on Intuitive, by the way, they just happen to be public. So their numbers are very available. Phenomenal company, but 60% of their revenue comes from instrumentation and accessories. So, and that's $10 billion market, $6 billion of it comes from that. So they're sold as a limited life reusable. If you look at their cutting instruments, they never make what they say they're going to. They sell them for 10 uses and they never make it. Surgeons will tell you usually around 4 or 5, usually about 7 or 8, something like that, is when they start really breaking down and having to return them. So from a customer standpoint, it's the #1 complaint. From the OEM standpoint, it reduces not only customer satisfaction, but also at the end of the year, they have to give back earnings. Credits, which reduce their earnings. Then the other thing I'd point out, in 2025, the first reprocessor of these devices was approved. So what does that mean? If we put Planatome on it, it changes the durability and the economics like we talked about before. So let's quantify that a little bit. If you look at the OEMs, MCS is monopolar curved scissors. So 10 surgeries is what they'll get. Ballpark, in a lab setting, 10 surgeries. We will add 20%. By putting our technology on there. Then when we remanufacture it, it will add, oh, we lost, something happened there. Okay, so yeah, so putting numbers to this is tens of millions of dollars. Oh, by the way, that would drop right to earnings, and Intuitive trades somewhere around 65 PE. So multiply that by 65, that tells you what it'll do to stock. And then when you remanufacture it with it, 110% increase in terms of what they're doing. So those are huge numbers. What is that? That's hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue and earnings. So those numbers are tremendous. So at the end of the day, what Planatome does is it extends the robotic assisted surgery value proposition. It's patented, so it's highly differentiated IP that is defensible on new and remanufactured devices, which is very unique. It was a facet of how we actually wrote the patents. The patent was granted last year. So it goes through 2043. So we have a very long runway. So anybody from a standpoint of clinical and economic instrument performance, devices with Planatome will far outperform traditional devices. So we actually finished raising our Series A, $10 million at the end of December. So, I would say we're not raising any money, but you're always raising money when you're a startup company. So thank you very much for your time. And, we look forward to what we're able to do in terms of improving the lives of others.